Thank you, Arthur, and good afternoon. My name is Laura Bornfreund, and I'm Deputy Director of the Early Education Initiative at New America. And I just thank you for the invitation to share our work with you. And I'm honored to be here today with so many esteemed researchers. Abbie, Lieberman, and I are here to talk to you about state policy. And we were invited to present because we are working on a scan of state policies that touch birth through third grade, which I'll talk about more in a moment. Just a little bit about, you can read about the Early Education Initiative. And I'd like to begin just by sharing a little bit of the work that we have going on, and then I'll jump into talk about our scan. Beginning this summer and through the end of the year, we're releasing 8 papers on reforming early education birth through third grade. Our look at San Francisco Unified School District's implementation of a pre-K-3rd grade approach was the first paper, and that came out in June. Our second report, which came out in early September, was Building Strong Readers in Minnesota. Our paper on the early ed workforce in California also came out at the end of September. And to follow will be reports on dual language learner initiatives in San Antonio, the David Douglas School District in Oregon, and Washington, D.C. And then finally, we will release a report on Massachusetts that's similar to the report on Minnesota, so looking at building strong readers there as well. And then the final report, which is what we'll be talking a little bit about today and previewing, is this 50-state scan of states' birth through third grade policies that support children's literacy development. We embarked on this project about a year ago to do this 50-state scan, not just on building children's literacy development, but sustaining and building on gains made at various points across that continuum. Most of the policies in our scan center on pre-K third grade, but we felt, and as it's been mentioned here today, it's also important to acknowledge that what happens before pre-K, before age 3, is quite important, and states can and certainly should do something to establish policies to support children's development and learning from birth. So our goal was to look comprehensively at how states are helping children get and stay on a path to be good readers and strong learners by the end of third grade. This is the point when content becomes much more challenging for all students, but especially for children who are not reading at grade level. We know that reading well at third grade is a predictor of success later in school, including graduating from high school. And we know that according, as Arthur's pointed out, to the most recent NAEP, that just 34% of children read proficiently at fourth grade. And among low-income students, this drops dramatically to less than 20% who read proficiently, and that's not acceptable. Over the past several years, many states have instituted third grade reading laws that are meant to identify struggling readers early on and provide them with interventions to get on track. Many of these laws also require children to be held back in the third grade if they are not reading at grade level. Determining whether children are progressing in reading and putting practices in place to support them when they are not are important, but they are not all that is necessary to ensure that children can, at the very least, read proficiently. Things like educator ability to teach reading and understand how young children learn best are key. So is children's access to high-quality pre-K and full-day kindergarten, and so are equitable funding and supports for dual language learners. Our conference paper is largely based on the approach we took to the scan and the data we compiled for it. Our team decided to look at state policies in 7 areas: educators, teachers and leaders birth through third grade, standards, assessment, and data systems, equitable funding, quality and access in pre-K, full-day kindergarten, supports for dual language learners, and those third grade reading laws. We compiled existing data previously collected by other organizations, such as the National Institute for Early Education Research, the Education Commission of the States, the National Council on Teacher Quality, the Early Childhood Data Collaborative, and a number of others. And in a very few instances, we identified a couple of indicators that we wanted to go directly to state websites or the regulations to find the answers. And there were several data points we could not easily find, or we weren't able to say exactly what the right policy should be for the state. This provides an opportunity for exploring new areas and highlighting new data in future similar scans. These missing pieces included things like requirements around curricula. Is there any guidance from the state across the continuum? How well are standards actually aligned across pre-K and the early grades? Funding levels for and quality in kindergarten. What kind of professional development is being delivered, and state policies around family engagement. This visual shows how we weighted each area. We gave most of the weight to educators because of the profound impact they have on student engagement and learning. The educator bucket is closely followed by standards curriculum, assessment and data, equitable funding, and then following and so forth. And we gave the least weight to the third grade reading laws. We ranked states in each of these individual policy areas and across all of them together, putting them into 3 categories of crawling, toddling, or walking. And the states are not discussed this way in our conference paper, but in November we'll release the full results of our scan and rankings of states. And so today Abbie and I will highlight some of the indicators in our scan and the ones that we did discuss in our conference paper. Educators, both teachers and leaders, have direct impact on children's learning, engagement, and development. And on this map, you can see how states came out on the 12 indicators we included in our scan. Purple, I guess there's sort of 2 shades of purple. The more red shade of purple is crawling. The bluer shade of purple is, or the dark blue is toddling, and the bright blue is walking. So you'd say no state is running. And to go into a bit more detail on some of the specific indicators that we included. First, states have lots of different teaching licenses. 38 states in DC have an early childhood education teaching license that bridges pre-K and K and extends at least to 2nd grade. This license typically overlaps with states' elementary teaching licenses that span K to 5, K to 6, or grade 1 to 5, or grade 1 to 6. We think that by providing an early childhood license, prospective teachers who know they want to teach in an early grade classroom can specialize in the ways that young children learn and develop, learn how to work with families, and benefit from clinical experience working with younger children. Generally speaking, early childhood teacher preparation programs are stronger in these areas than elementary preparation programs, which do not always afford clinical practice in kindergarten classrooms or provide an emphasis on the needs of our youngest learners. And for this reason, as the second bullet point, one of our indicators asks whether states require at least kindergarten teachers to have that early childhood license, and 13 states and DC do. 13 states also require early childhood education candidates to pass a reading pedagogy test, and 19 require elementary candidates to do the same. While we know these tests cannot necessarily tell how well teachers will actually apply their knowledge to real-time situations in the classroom with students, we think they do signal the importance of reading pedagogy and instruction for both preparation programs and teacher candidates. As I said earlier, leaders matter, the principals matter a lot in the school setting, and elementary school principals need to have an understanding of what good teaching looks like in an early grade classroom, and pre-K as well, as more and more pre-K programs are becoming into school buildings and under the control of principals. While 5 states require principals to have child development coursework, only 1, Illinois, requires an early childhood education focus. And they also not just offer the early childhood content, but also field experiences to expose principals to pre-K through 12th grade instructional activities. And there is a plan to include an early childhood emphasis in principal certification exams in Illinois as well. just a look a little bit of a different way at some information. We also looked at child care center licensing standards because educational requirements for teachers in birth to 5 programs are also important to strengthening the profession and helping to ensure that children or that teachers of young children have an understanding of child development. Under state child care licensing requirements, 19 states require lead teachers to have at least some training. So this is more than a high school diploma. Only 19 states require center directors to have at least a child development associate or an AA in a related field, leaving more than half of states requiring even less. And in my mind, the job of a center director is not vastly different from that of an elementary school principal, but educational requirements certainly are. And as you can see, there's a long way to go to meet the bachelor's degree requirement, the recommendation, set out by the IOM's Transforming the Workforce report. Standards, assessment, and data are also key components of a strong learning continuum. We were not able to look at how well standards and assessments were aligned and sequenced across the pre-K 3rd grades in states. But in those states that do pay attention to alignment, and certainly at the local level when they pay attention to alignment, we'd expect children would have a more seamless and scaffolded learning experience across the continuum. And this map shows, again, how states fare on the 18 indicators we included in this section. Oh, I jumped ahead. Excuse me. Every state has comprehensive early learning guidelines for pre-K, and all but 2 have them for infant and toddler programs. While most states, and as we heard this morning, say they align these guidelines in K-12 standards, the depth of that alignment is what really matters, and in many states it's really just a matching of subject areas or terminology used. 6 states, and this was also mentioned, a focus on carrying the emphasis in pre-K on social-emotional learning up through the early grades, and 6 states require grade level or have grade level specific standards for social-emotional learning as well, at least into the K through 3 grades. Moving to assessment, 26 of the states with pre-K programs require that a multi-domain pre-K formative assessment be used in those programs and give recommendations on what those assessment tools should be. 39 states have a comprehensive kindergarten entry assessment in some stage of development, and 13 have fully implemented. But only 6 states offer recommendations for what or have any type of approach to reading and math assessment in the K through 2nd grades. And we're not saying that there should be a specific required standardized assessment in those grades, but an approach or some type of recommendation to districts on what good tools are. More states do require or encourage reading assessment under those third grade reading laws, but we think that math should also be an emphasis as well. And in addition to those 6, there's 9 states and DC that are participating in a K through 3rd formative assessment consortium that is funded by the federal government's enhanced assessment grant program. And so we think that there'll be or hoping that there's promising assessments that come out of that. Moving to data systems, 21 states cannot link or do not link right now child level data from any early childhood program to their K-12 longitudinal data system. And here's a closer look at which programs states can link and which states are linking child level data from the program to their K-12 longitudinal data system. And information about children's participation and experiences in childcare, pre-K, or other programs can help states and local education agencies make decisions about current and future investments in early education policies and programs. And these data can also help schools and kindergarten teachers be better prepared to meet the needs of youngsters entering the classrooms. We also looked at equitable funding, which we think is highly important. Oops. Okay. There we go. And this map shows how states fare on the 6 indicators we included for equitable funding in pre-K, K-12, and related to child care subsidies. 17 states, including DC, fund at least one of their pre-K programs. There's a couple of states that have multiple pre-K programs through a school funding formula. We think paying for pre-K in this manner raises its profile by recognizing it as a part of children's core education and provides more reliable and stable funding. Looking at child care subsidy reimbursement, this is another indicator we included under equitable funding. And in 2013 or 14, only 3 states reimbursed at a rate equal to or above the 75th percentile of market rate as recommended by the federal government. And we think this is especially important. States set these reimbursements under the Child Care and Development Block Grant for child care providers that accept families receiving those subsidies. The reimbursement rate is the highest amount the state will give a provider for serving these children and families. But the max reimbursement rate is often set well below the market rate for child care, meaning there is little incentive for the highest quality providers to participate. And for K-12 funding, we look to a school funding fairness report to determine whether states are sending more dollars to districts with higher concentrations of students living in poverty. 15 states have a progressive funding distribution, 19 states have a flat funding distribution, and 14 have a regressive funding distribution. And here's a look at where the states fall. At the local level, the primary funding source for schools comes from the local level and is property taxes, which means that schools serving the nation's most vulnerable children, those facing poverty, hunger, family turmoil, high mobility, and number of other challenges are often the least likely to have sufficient economic and non-economic resources to overcome those challenges. States can and should establish a formula that addresses these local inequalities or helps to address them. According to the analysis in the School Funding Fairness Report in 2012, and as we can see from the chart, the majority of states do not provide higher poverty districts with more state resources. And now my colleague Abbie Lieberman, a policy analyst for the Early Education Initiative, will talk about the next 3 policy areas, and then I'll be back up to wrap things up.
Thank you, Laura. So our next policy bucket is pre-K. And providing access to high-quality pre-K is an essential step to improving children's chances of reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade. So this map displays how states fared overall on our indicators for public pre-K. We had a total of 9 indicators that measured both access and quality. And as with the previous maps, the pinkish color, reddish color, is crawling, purple is toddling, and blue is walking. So the blue states had the strongest pre-K policies in place in terms of both access and quality. And again, we're looking at very high level quality, indicators of quality for this scan. So many of the pink states here, such as Idaho and New Hampshire, don't have any pre-K policies, public pre-K in place. So here's a few of the indicators we looked at. First and foremost, do states have a pre-K program? There's been increased national attention around the benefits of pre-K in recent years, causing many states to expand access, especially for 4-year-olds. So currently, 41 states and DC have some type of public program in place. There are, however, big disparities in the reach and quality of these programs. For instance, the majority of states serve less than 20% of 4-year-olds. And the numbers are significantly worse for 3-year-olds. Only 25 states in DC serve any 3-year-olds in their pre-K programs. And only 1 state, Vermont, and DC serve more than a quarter of children. DC is actually one of the strongest examples in terms of access. The district provides free pre-K for nearly all 4-year-olds and about 70% of 3-year-olds. So while access to pre-K is the first step, we all know that we're only going to see significant and sustained gains if programs are high quality, as we've discussed today. There are multiple quality indicators associated with better child outcomes. For instance, as we talked about earlier, we know that full day programs are associated with better outcomes than half-day programs in general. Yet only 8 states and DC provide pre-K students with a full day, which we consider to mean at least 6 hours per day and 5 days per week. As Laura discussed, high-quality teachers are another major factor affecting student achievement and pre-K quality. Only 21 states and DC require pre-K teachers in state-funded programs to have a BA with an early childhood specialization, and only 15 states require assistant teachers to hold at least a Child Development Associate, or CDA. So assistant teachers spend a lot of time with children during these most formative years, and yet their education and training is all but ignored in state policy. Our next policy area is full-day kindergarten. So in order for children to sustain the gains made in pre-K, we know that they need access to a year of full-day kindergarten after. High-quality full-day programs allow more time for literacy instruction, more time for quality interactions between teachers and children, and are associated with better student outcomes. Yet access and quality of full-day kindergarten also varies significantly by state, as you can see here. We measured states based on 4 kindergarten indicators, and again, pink is crawling, purple is toddling, and blue is walking. To improve early learning outcomes for all students, many states are going to need to make kindergarten a much larger priority. So a strong full-day kindergarten program is a key component of pre-K-3rd alignment. It's the bridge between early learning in elementary school, and it's the first time many children are entering the elementary school setting. Yet only 11 states and DC require districts to offer full-day kindergarten. A few states still don't require districts to provide kindergarten at all. Surprisingly, many states fund only a half day of kindergarten, and 13 of these states allow districts to charge tuition for the rest of the day, which puts the funding burden on parents, often leaving children from low-income families in half-day programs. And these are arguably the same families who have the most to benefit from a full-day program. It's also worth noting that a full day in kindergarten isn't necessarily equivalent to a full day in first grade or the later grades. Depending on the state, a full day kindergarten program can range from anywhere from 4 hours a day to 7 hours a day. And in almost half of states, the minimum length of day for full day kindergarten is less than first grade. So here's a look at where specific states fall on a few of the indicators that I discussed. So the first column shows states that have full day kindergarten programs. The second shows states that require districts to offer full day kindergarten. So that's where children are guaranteed access to full day kindergarten. And the third shows which states allow districts to charge for full day kindergarten. And as you can see, many states are missing from these first 2 columns. Next, we looked at dual language learners. So our research would be incomplete without acknowledging how state policies are serving this rapidly increasing population of students. Some have estimated that by 2030, up to 40% of American students will speak a language other than English at home. Yet state policies governing dual language learners are not usually aligned with the current research on students' academic needs. We rated states based on 4 indicators for dual language learners, and you can see here how they fared. And here are a few of those indicators. So identifying and supporting dual language learners as early as possible is important for their long-term success, yet only 15 states and DC require state-funded pre-K programs to conduct screenings to even identify these students. Identification is the first step to getting these students the services and supports they need in school. 23 states and DC have language instruction rules for state-funded pre-K programs, and unfortunately, a handful of states still endorse English-only instruction, which has found to be less effective for dual language learners. And lastly, 21 states mention families that speak a language other than English in their family engagement laws or regulations. We included this indicator because we're calling attention to the fact that these states are at least thinking about dual language learners in their laws. And this chart identifies how states are meeting these 3 indicators that I just discussed. And now I'll pass it back to Laura to finish our presentation.
Our last policy area is about the 3rd grade reading laws, and as you can see, we threw an extra color in there on you. The true purple is for states that do not have a specific third grade reading law as of this summer. And this map shows how states fare on our 7 indicators. To highlight a few of the indicators we included, 36 states and DC have third grade reading laws. There is much in common across these laws when it comes to approaches to identifying struggling readers and the kinds of supports provided to help them improve. There is also one key distinction between 2 groups of states: those that require students to be held back in the 3rd grade if they do not show they are reading at grade level on a state's annual reading assessment, and those that do not. Research does not support retention, showing it can often do more harm than good, and further, it can be costly for districts. A little more than half of the states that do require retention, however, also allow opportunities for students to be promoted if they participate in an intervention, summer school for instance, and nearly all allow for some exemptions for students, such as being a dual language learner. Most states with these reading laws require reading assessments to identify struggling readers in the K through 3rd grades. 5 states also require those assessments in pre-K. And just about every state requires information about student progress to be communicated to parents. This slide offers a look at the states with reading laws, those that require retention, and those that provide an opportunity for promotion if students participate in an intervention. I should note that Florida, which is the leading state or the first state the state leading the way on these 3rd grade reading laws, just in the last 2 months or so shifted the decision about retention from the state level to local school districts. In closing, a scan of state policies can only tell us so much. While strong policies at the state level can help establish conditions for good practices at the local level, there is a lot of variation across states in what decisions are left to local districts and communities, the state capacity to support implementation of policies, and funding linked to initiatives set at the state level. All of these things and others can impact the quality of implementation, and implementation is just as important as the policy itself. States establish the frame for what should be done, but without attention to implementation, which includes evaluation and flexibility within the policy to make necessary changes, acknowledge new research, the policy will fail. And so, thank you.